Welcome to Suddenly Different, where we explore stories and strategies for life when it doesn't go to plan. I'm Leigh-Anne Charland, inviting you to join me on this journey. What if the most radical act of strength wasn't about pushing harder, climbing higher, or enduring more, but about giving something away? Today's conversation is about legacy, love, and the power of choice. My guest is Dr. Matthew Harmody, an emergency physician of 25 years, endurance athlete, author, and living kidney donor. But his story does not begin in an operating theatre. It begins as a college sophomore, watching his strong, veteran father slowly fade under the weight of kidney failure. It begins with dialysis machines, with missed opportunities, with love that chose protection over sacrifice. Years later, unable to help his father, Matthew made a decision that would change another family's future forever. He chose to become a living kidney donor. This isn't a story about heroism. It's a story about reframing fear, about service beyond ego, about what happens when medicine meets meaning. And for anyone listening who has ever wondered, could I? Today we explore that question together. Welcome, Matthew, to Suddenly Different.
It's great to be here, Leigh-Anne.
It's such an unusual story that we're going to share today. And for many people who are listening, kidney disease or kidney issues may never have really hit them. But after speaking with you on our introduction call, I understood clearly how important it is for there to be living kidney donors and what a wonderful gift to humanity that you are providing by being an advocate for this important cause. So can you take us back to your dad? What was it like watching him with his kidney disease?
Yes. So, Leigh-Anne, I was away at school, and it happened to be finals week, and I got the call from my mother that she was dragging my father to the Cleveland Clinic. He generally would not do things that he didn't want to do, but I think he was so sick that he reluctantly gave in. And I didn't get to see him at that time. I was about 4 hours away. But after a couple more final exams, I made the drive home and got to see him while he was still in the hospital. And it was utterly amazing how he had deteriorated already to that point. So they put him on emergent dialysis, which meant that his kidneys had failed completely and toxins were building up in his blood. Probably waiting much longer could have led to his death, certainly. And it was hard to see him that way. He was always very strong, active. He was an outdoorsman. As you mentioned earlier, he was a Korean War veteran and very self-disciplined and self-reliant. I mean, he was an auto mechanic, so the cars never went into the shop to get fixed. He was out in the garage no matter how cold it was doing the repair, and also no matter how late it was. So it was hard. And that was just the beginning, because over the next several years, his health gradually declined.
And many men, but like all of us, we tend to think that our health is, if we have bad health, it's temporary and that we can, we'll just get over it. And we don't really understand what our organs do and when they're not functioning, what the symptoms could be of them not functioning.
Yes, that's absolutely true. And when you listen to people that study longevity, and that's really what's called health span and lifespan. So it's not just living to an old age, but it's living into an old age gracefully and healthy and able to do the things that you want to do. The biggest factor in how well you do with that is avoiding chronic medical conditions. And you're right, if you break your ankle, yes, it's temporary. In almost all cases, it heals fine, and then you can get back to your regular routine without any permanent or long lasting issues. But in the case of kidney disease, the two leading risk factors are diabetes and high blood pressure or hypertension. And they're called chronic conditions for that reason, that they generally, once they set in, they don't go away for the most part. Now, I've known people to change their diet, stop smoking, lose a bunch of weight, and maybe be able to reverse high blood pressure or diabetes, but it takes a Herculean effort to be able to do that.
That's right. And did you offer your father one of your kidneys to assist him?
So my dad also was an attorney, and there weren't many debates or discussions at the dinner table, so to speak. It was kind of his way or not. So there wasn't much debate around that particular issue. I did have two uncles, his brothers, that could have been candidates, and I'm the oldest of three children, and I was about 20 years old at that time. So we three probably would have been the most likely candidates. But my father decided early on that that wasn't something he wanted to do, and really the only thing he said to that point, Leigh-Anne, was that he's led a full life to that point, and he didn't want to risk someone else's life to help him.
Yeah, I can understand both sides of that coin, but how did it feel like to you as a young man, knowing that you really wanted to help your dad?
There was some fear associated with that. I was not. I was an engineering student. I had no real interest in medicine at the time, and I knew nothing about donation. There just, unfortunately, Leigh-Anne, wasn't any discussion or even, you know, let's go talk to someone about living kidney donation. As we may get into it a little bit later,
Yeah.
if someone expresses an interest in living kidney donation, there's no upfront commitment, so to speak. You can actually back out and decide against donation right up until you're in the pre-op holding area getting prepared for surgery. And I can still distinctly remember being asked by the anesthesiologist if I still wanted to proceed with living kidney donation. And they just do that to make sure that there's not any undue influence or pressure on someone to donate. It's a relatively big decision, but there are a lot of protections put in place. But unfortunately, we never got to that point. My father just kind of closed the door on that option.
Yeah. So you did make the decision in 2017 to do the extreme act of donating a kidney to a stranger.
Yes. So my dad's experience did lead me to go back to medical school, and I pursued emergency medicine, as you had mentioned earlier. And I probably every day that I worked, I saw at least one patient that was on dialysis. And again, for your listeners, dialysis is one of two options for someone that has complete kidney failure. That means that person generally is not producing any urine or maybe a very little bit. So the toxins and the extra fluid that the kidneys normally would eliminate from our bodies is no longer happening. So dialysis treatments, which are lifelong, you generally would not come off dialysis, is one treatment option. Receiving a transplanted kidney is the other option. And all those patients that I saw, Leigh-Anne, every one of them reminded me of my father. In the emergency department, unfortunately, you see people at their worst, whether they're sick or badly injured, and you have to keep that in mind. But kidney failure and eventually being on dialysis is just so devastating that people decline rapidly. Just to give you a couple of statistics as an example, only about 25% of people that are on dialysis can work full time. It's that devastating, just energy sapping. And secondly, once you're on dialysis, 50% of people will die within 5 years. So it's just incredibly difficult to last. And I just call it a slow death. When people ask me what dialysis is like, I got to see my father do it. In some cases, depending on what type of dialysis you take, you may do it at home. You may have to do it 3 or 4 times a day at home, all the way to going to a dialysis center 3 times a week.
It's again, it's something that we sort of take for granted that, we can go to the bathroom whenever we want, and then making a decision to help someone, and then going through I can imagine researching, understanding more about the risks and the and activities that you need to do to ensure that you're well continually so that you don't have kidney problems yourself?
Yeah, so those are all great points. The evaluation process is extremely thorough, both from a medical standpoint and also from a psychological standpoint. The transplant center that you are choosing to be evaluated by are being extra cautious in making sure that, one, you're fit to have surgery, and two, you're doing it for the right reasons. The process takes several weeks to months, depending on your schedule. There's a lot of blood work and imaging, which includes a CAT scan of your abdomen area, a chest X-ray, and then you also get a psychiatric evaluation during that process. And then it goes to a transplant center committee that reviews each case and then decides if you're qualified to be a donor. You have to be pretty healthy. That's without question. And it's not all due to health concerns, but only about 1.5 of every 100 people, Leigh-Anne, that raise their hand and say, I want to be considered to be a living kidney donor, actually eventually donate. Now,
Right.
a lot of it is medically related, but it also could be financial. It could be, in the case of maybe someone reaching out to their circle of friends and family, and say 10 people step forward to be evaluated, and one person makes it through the process maybe a little bit more quickly than the other 9, and they're approved, then those 9 would not, in most cases, not necessarily consider donating, which I think is unfortunate, because I think that's a huge group of people that could go on to donate to a stranger like I did and make a difference in someone else's life. I get the fact that most people want to help a close friend or family, but there's so many people in need, and so many people don't have that circle of family or friends that they can draw upon. Someone that has diabetes and hypertension that led to their kidney failure often lives with family and friends that have the same conditions. And because those are risk factors for developing kidney disease, in most cases, if you have diabetes or high blood pressure, you would not be considered as a candidate for donation. Now, there are some caveats there. Your diabetes or your high blood pressure is very well controlled, you still could be considered a donor candidate.
So, one of the things that you just said, the money element of it, is it something that is funded by the transplant center, or is it something that has to be medically funded through your own health insurance?
That's a great question. And when I mentor prospective living kidney donors, it's probably one of the top 2 or 3 myths or questions that people have. So to start, about 80% of people are on government insurance that have kidney disease that requires dialysis, and that's Medicare, despite their age. So back in I believe the 1980s, federal legislation was passed to state that anyone that had chronic kidney disease would be covered by Medicare. The other 20% is private insurance. So, someone is working for a company, they have insurance through their company, and they develop chronic kidney disease. So that's why it's not 100% Medicare. And when someone begins their evaluation, the first appointment you have, let's just say the first time you have blood drawn, they start the transplant center that you choose to work through starts an account that is just maintained to include all your testing and all your appointments. And once it's decided where your kidney is going to go, that entire account is transferred to that patient's insurance. So
Right.
you somewhat, in medicine, we might call that a dummy account. It wouldn't have my name on it, for example, and my insurance would not be seeing those charges and those bills, but it's set aside until the intended recipient receives your kidney. The other related question along those lines, Leigh-Anne, is wages and
Mm.
what do people do about being out of work. There are organizations such as the National Kidney Registry, whom I donated through, that actually replace lost wages up to a certain point. So it's very beneficial. It's very easy to qualify for that lost wage reimbursement, and it makes a huge difference so that you can be out of work and take your time to recover.
Yeah.
And that can be anywhere from 4 to 8 weeks, depending on what type of work you do. Some people, if you mostly work behind a desk, that you're much more closer to the 4 weeks of returning. If you're a UPS, FedEx driver, in and out of a truck all day carrying packages, you're probably going to be closer to the 8-week return.
Mm. So what happens if you are deemed to not be a viable candidate? Do you have to take on does it still go to the Medicare, Medicaid?
That's a great question. I would imagine it gets written off at the
Oh,
transplant center. Yeah, that is a great question. It may vary center to center,
yeah,
but
yeah.
yes, and a lot of people are evaluated and either do not qualify, or like the example I gave earlier, someone else is qualified for that intended recipient sooner, so they go ahead with the procedure and the living kidney donation.
So many people would imagine that life after a kidney donation is fragile or restricted. Now, you've done some activities that may slightly prove that that's not true, like climbing mountains or something, or running endurance races, or I don't know.
Yes, all of the above. That would probably be another one of the top three questions or myths that I get when I mentor, again, prospective kidney donors. Um, I truly believe that everyone returns to their usual state of health and physical activity. There are rare complications that people develop, but and I also know people that weren't terribly active before donation and wanted to be more careful and healthier to protect their single kidney. And they lost weight, they started exercising, so it has that effect on people as well. But yes, I have kind of been interested in endurance sports all my life, and I still do a lot of running and cycling. And the running, as I suffer through a kind of an extended knee injury, you realize something you've done since your teenage years is starting to be taken away from you. You realize how your identity is affected by such things. But running's always been an important part of my life. I've done everything from your 5 and 10K races to upwards of 100-kilometer races, or about 60 miles. And I donated in late September, and then I did a 100K trail race in mid-January the following year. So that's, less than 4 months. That was my best effort. That specific race in that event told me that I was 100% back to normal. And, I got there pretty quickly. People often ask about recovery from surgery, and it varies person to person, but I was sitting my surgery was in the morning. It lasted about 5 hours. I was up sitting in a chair in my room that afternoon. I was walking in the halls the following day, and then I was discharged the next day. And my wife and I walked, easily several miles a day in that first week. Returning to riding a mountain bike, I was a little bit more cautious because I really didn't want to take a fall, and of course I'd land on the wrong side. But
Yeah.
yeah, but I returned to running, and really everyone I know that's a kidney donor had similar success stories. I think on the flip side, Leigh-Anne, I think it's important that people realize that you don't have to be an endurance athlete or a mountain climber to donate a kidney. I've said this many times before to people. It's living kidney donation is the ability of an ordinary person to do something extraordinary to save someone's life. And people come from all walks of life with limited or no activity to being very active. And it's really important, if you're interested in it, to pursue it and not just hear me talk about running ultramarathons and realize, oh, there's no way I would qualify to be a donor.
Yeah. I think, I mean, the purpose of today is for expanded awareness. Like, it's something I had never thought about. Even though my grandfather's second wife, I'm pretty sure she only had half of one kidney left when she
Hmm.
was in her old age. So,
Mm-hmm.
she didn't do terribly much because she was in her 80s, but she'd had kidney troubles, and I sort of had forgotten a bit about her until I was preparing for today.
Yeah.
So choosing to go from engineering into medicine is a bit of a change. What's your story behind the decision to go from having your engineering qualifications and going into medicine?
Yeah, there wasn't one aha moment. I'm pretty contemplative about major life decisions, and maybe it's just human nature to procrastinate about change. First, as I rose in corporate America, I became more and more disenchanted with the work I was doing. And when I looked at my colleagues that were, 5 or 10 years older than I was, it just was not promising for me to be enjoying that type of work. Secondly, I think we're here on this earth to help people in whatever capacity we have. And it could be as simple as opening a door for someone to much greater things. And I did some youth mentoring, I did some middle school basketball coaching, but there just wasn't enough time working in corporate America to do the things to the degree I wanted to do them. And then really the icing on the cake was my dad's experience, all the time I spent in the hospital with him, getting to see the medical care team in action and making a difference in people's lives. I didn't know anyone in medicine in my family or any close friends, but it just felt like it was the right thing to do. Yes, I took a lunch break and went down the street to Case Western Reserve, which is the medical school near us, and met with the dean of admissions and went on from there.
Wow. And you stayed in the emergency department for the whole of your medical career. Is that right?
Yes, in
Yeah.
medicine, it's somewhat difficult to change specialties. You certainly can do it, but yeah. So I did a residency program that was 3 years long in emergency medicine, and then I was board certified in emergency medicine. And yes, I worked my entire career in emergency departments.
So have you seen the um, show the Pit?
A lot of people ask me that. I
It
went to
seems
back.
amazing.
I've heard that. I've seen some of the advertising for it.
Yeah.
The short answer, Leigh-Anne, is no, I haven't seen it, but I've heard great things about it. I actually, went back to medical school a little bit later in life, and it was during the time of ER. And of course, Noah Wiley was maybe not a lead role in ER, but certainly a very prominent actor in that show. And now he's at it again in the Pit. Yeah, my wife enjoyed ER much more so than I did. I found myself watching it and being kind of critical when they were doing things that weren't realistic. As I told people, at least ER, and I know the Pit's a little bit different. In the show ER, they took like a year's worth of crazy cases and put it into a 1 hour show, and then of course overlaid all the romantic relationships. So yeah, maybe someday
Yeah.
I'll
Well,
binge watch the Pit.
the Pit is, I think, the whole season is one day. But it's really interesting to see the mental health of the actors or how they're acting, the
Hmm.
impact of seeing children dying and patients on dialysis. And so that impact of seeing people at their worst on you as a person and your view on the world, I wonder whether that is difficult to separate from.
I think that if you don't have the proper mindset and you have the Eeyore personality of, woe is me, why are all these people here? They don't need to be here, or, why did someone let this or that happen to themselves? Yeah, I think burnout is just going to be around the corner, and you're going to provide poor patient care, and no one's going to want to work with you or want to be your patient. So it takes you build up some resilience, and you don't want to lose your empathy for people.
Yes.
And that's another thing that can easily happen. We always used to talk about our empathy well. Some things fill it. You make a critical diagnosis, or someone comes back from death, or you just get a big smile and a hug from a pediatric patient. I mean, there's so many ways that you keep your empathy well filled. But things like running and cycling and doing those types of things, especially outside in nature, completely would fill my empathy well. So it was important to have something enjoyable outside of work, and that certainly was family and faith and exercise for me.
Fabulous. So you retired early to focus on your advocacy. That's a big decision. How did that reshape your identity, or was your identity very strong and you are who you are?
I think that falls under the saying, on convictions loosely held, to maybe a little bit of a stretch. But yes, when I was working clinically, seeing patients, in my last few years, I was president of our physician group. All those things were so much a part of my identity. But I was also, a husband, a father, a brother, a son, and those were much more, I think, important identities. And some identities are fixed, and those family relationships certainly are. And your identity is whether you're tall or speak a particular language is part of your identity, and those things are fixed. But a lot of your identity is malleable, and I think changes, especially over long periods of time. And I didn't find it too hard to kind of give up my physician identity. I did gradually um, wind my career down, and I did some administrative work for many months after I stopped seeing patients. I also was up until very recently, the chair of our hospital board. So I still had a lot of involvement with the hospital. And now I'm on the board of our hospital's foundation, which is the charitable arm of the nonprofit hospital system. But I found after donating that initially just saw it as a private matter, and really just my close family and of course my partners in my group were really the only ones that knew that I was a donor until I had an opportunity to go climb Mount Kilimanjaro in Tanzania with 21 other living kidney donors. It just,
Wow.
serendipitously fell into my lap. And of course, that trip was all about raising awareness for living kidney donation. So I actually had to get the social media account for the first time, and I had to, you know, kind of announce the trip and what the trip was about. And we also raised money for those that could not afford to go on the trip. And that was a wonderful experience. And that really kind of set the seed for, boy, I could be and should be doing this full time. So shortly thereafter, and it was, through the period of COVID, and I wasn't going to desert our emergency department and our staff and my colleagues in the middle of COVID. So I kind of rode out most of COVID before I decided to retire. And yeah, now I tell people my full-time job is advocating for living kidney donation.
Yeah. Well, so it sounds to me as though the jobs you've had have been important at different phases of your life. And this is a very important phase now. Both of our fathers were veterans, yours in the Korean War and mine in the Vietnam War. There's a cultural layer there where they're stoic and they're organized and they're strong and they self-sacrifice and they hate being a burden. Did you see what is your experience of those generational beliefs from your dad influencing his life decisions and how we can learn from those?
Yeah, so I completely agree, Leigh-Anne, that those are generational characteristics. As I mentioned earlier, yes, my father grew up being very self-reliant, very self-disciplined. He worked hard, and even in his avocations, he was all in. I mean, he liked to fish and hunt, for example. So he was down in the basement in his workbench tying flies that he would use to fly fish with because it was important to him, even though he could go stand in a creek for several hours and not catch anything and be perfectly content with that. And I think I inherited that as well because, he was someone I very much look up to. And I think I've tried, especially now as being a father myself, tried to, hold on to the positive aspects of my father and what he taught me and try to, modify or improve or, in some cases just try to disregard some attributes that I think I could improve upon. And I think one of those is, it's not weakness to ask for help. In fact, I would argue that it takes more strength to be willing to open yourself up and ask for help. And, for example, I never really had a mentor in all my careers in engineering and corporate America and medicine. I just figured out everything myself. And that's kind of what my dad taught me. So I have encouraged, our adult sons now to establish mentors, learn from people that are doing, what you want to do someday. Really helps kind of shorten the cycle of being able to do the things you want to do in a much more rapid time frame. And I think it's just also much more enjoyable to, for example, playing golf. My dad was, probably a near scratch golfer, but he didn't have the patience to teach. So I had learned with my buddies at a young age. We just, were self taught, and uh, and to this day, I don't play a lot of golf, but I've never really improved dramatically. And so that was one lesson. It's like, okay, don't just take your boys out and play golf. So they didn't have private lessons, but they were in golf camps every summer and with their friends. And now they can go out and play respectably without a lot of work and effort. And I think that's just because they learn from a mentor or a coach. So yeah, I would definitely agree with that statement.
Yeah. So you're a lifelong learner and an endurance athlete. What has this donation taught you about the stewardship that we all have of our health?
The healthier you are, the better you take care of yourself, the more you can enjoy life and also make a difference in one's life. We'll take kidney disease as an example, since that's the general topic here. That once someone has kidney failure and they're on dialysis, it just sucks the life out of that person and their close family and friends. So now that person is less likely to work. Sometimes they're so drained from their dialysis treatments that they may not even be able to drive home. So now someone has to drive them and pick them up from their appointments. Maybe they're the breadwinner. Maybe they're the stay-at-home parent that makes all the meals and does all the chores. And now that person can't continue doing that, and the ripple effect is so negative, and it really just hinders the development of the children and the enjoyment of life of that family. Whereas if you're taking care of yourself and avoiding things like high blood pressure and diabetes, you can lead a full life, you can have a ton of energy, and then you not only can you work and work fully, but you can also contribute to your community in whatever way you see fit. But if you develop those chronic illnesses, you're going to be so focused on yourself, which you should be, because that's a challenge in and of itself. Just your community, your family, your circle of friends just suffers then.
Yes, yes. Do you think that in this period of time where we have so much corn syrup and sugar and even artificial sweeteners in our food and ultra processed food, do you think that kidney disease and diabetes is more prevalent?
Oh, absolutely. There's
Yep.
over 100 million people with diabetes in this country, and there's about 35 million people with high blood pressure. And we have an equal number, about 35 million people with some form of chronic kidney disease. There's 5 stages. The fifth stage, being that you need dialysis or a transplant. And it's, we have over 90,000 people on the kidney transplant wait list, and that number grows a little bit every year, and it would grow a lot more if uh, about 4,500 people every year die waiting for a transplant, and another 4,500 become too sick to be able to tolerate what is essentially major surgery. So yes, we just put more and more people on dialysis, and most of those folks will work their way to try to be on the transplant list, but we haven't moved that needle in a long time. Living kidney donations haven't increased in over 20 years.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because it used to be all about tobacco, right? We used to lung cancer was the big thing. The taxes on cigarettes, like the model they use to tax them makes them very expensive nowadays. But I don't know whether the impact of cigarettes on the health system is as high as it used to be. But it is interesting that the impact of sugar on the health system is so high.
Yes, that's definitely the case. And I'm not sure if there's any governmental entities that tax sugar, corn syrup. I know there were some cities that were attempting to do that, but my understanding is, or my recollection is, that those were not successful. But it's as the saying goes, it's kind of like it's in the water.
Well, that's right.
Everything, not everything, but there's so many inexpensive foods that use those sweeteners, you know, corn syrup or artificial, and it's it's avoidable, but it's difficult. And in this country, it's I think most people would agree it's a little bit more expensive to eat healthy versus not. And you can
Most
go to a
definitely.
fast food restaurant and get quite a bit of food for very little. It's not going to be terribly healthy for you, but yes, and we don't. Well, my opinion, of course, is biased. We certainly don't encourage exercise enough, and I'm not again here to say everyone should go and run a marathon, but studies have shown just walking a certain amount every week is more than sufficient, and your risk of death goes down dramatically compared to someone that doesn't exercise at all.
Absolutely. So for the audience, we will put all the links for the different organizations in the US and in Australia in the show notes. So, and we do encourage the listeners to explore education and, you know, open their minds to the this as a possibility. It isn't like it sounds like it's not terribly life changing, except that you've done this amazing thing, and it sounds like it doesn't make your health deteriorate, so that's good. And so I think we've ticked most of the boxes.
Just to summarize real quickly,
Yeah.
I mentioned four things to people. The first being awareness. You know what, especially hypertension, diabetes is like. See a primary care doctor. Get tested um, for those things if necessary. So that's number one. Number two is education. You just mentioned that, whether it's about these chronic illnesses that you may develop or you have family members that develop them, kind of knowing where resources are that you can learn more about them. And the ones that you'll list in the show notes will be great places for people to go to. Number three is consider living kidney donation. I've never asked anyone specifically to say, hey, why don't you donate a kidney? But what I do, Leigh-Anne, is educate people and provide them the resources and allow them to make their own decisions. And then I've had a number of people come back to me and say, hey, I want to learn more. And then fourth is technology and medicine. Someday I think we'll probably have pig kidneys available to be transplanted. And I think supporting science in all aspects of medicine and health is important. It's not a solution for today or even probably for the next few years, but I think in the long run, it's a very reasonable option that will be considered.
Yeah, well, I remember when my mum had quadruple bypass, I think she had some
Mm,
pig valves put in.
yes,
So, yes.
we have
So,
many decades of experience with pig valves. You're
yes,
absolutely right about that.
very good. Okay, well, in closing, Matthew, today we've talked about kidneys, but what we've really talked about is choice. We've talked about the space between fear and action, and about the difference between thinking something is impossible and discovering it's simply unfamiliar. You watching your father endure 9 years of dialysis, you carried that grief quietly, and instead of letting it harden you, you let it shape you. You chose contribution. For everyone listening, this isn't a call to donate tomorrow. It's a call to stay curious, to learn, to ask better questions about what is actually possible, because sometimes the most extraordinary acts are done by the very ordinary people who simply decide to help. Matthew, thank you for your service, not just in the emergency rooms, but in showing us what life after giving can look like. And to our listeners, if this conversation stirred something in you, follow that thread. Education dissolves fear. story builds courage, and one decision can rewrite an entire family's future. This has been Suddenly Different. Thank you, Matt.
My pleasure, Leigh-Anne.
This has been Suddenly Different. I'm Leigh-Anne Charland, and I'm so grateful you shared your time with me. If you felt a spark, a tear, or a moment of recognition, I hope you'll pass that gift along by sharing this show. Take a deep breath, trust your path, and I'll meet you back here soon.